I've missed you so much.
Why are you dressed like that?
Because it's so warm in here.
It won 18 Emmy Awards, launched the careers of some of Hollywood's biggest names, and never once ran out of story to tell. And yet, it got canceled, not once, but twice. This is Taxi, 1978. How the smash hit sitcom was canceled twice.
That's telling him, Latka.
Where the idea came from. The story starts not in a writer's room, but in a magazine. In 1975, James L. Brooks, who had just spent 7 successful seasons as a writer and producer on The Mary Tyler Moore Show, came across an article in New York Magazine titled Night Shifting for the Hip Fleet, written by Mark Jacobson. The piece profiled cab drivers working the night shift at a Greenwich Village taxi garage. What Jacobson captured, and what immediately hooked Brooks, was the gap between where these people were and where they wanted to be. They were all chasing something else, a career, a dream, a version of life that had not arrived yet, while being held in place, temporarily, behind a steering wheel. The garage itself had a specific character, grim, functional, unglamorous, with the feel of a place people pass through rather than a place anyone intended to stay. Brooks brought the idea to his colleagues, Stan Daniels, David Davis, and Ed Weinberger, all of whom had worked with him on the Mary Tyler Moore Show. The 4 of them had recently left MTM Enterprises to form their own production company, the John Charles Walters Company, and were operating under a deal with Paramount that included 2 committed pilot slots at ABC. When Brooks called his former colleague Grant Tinker and asked if he could buy the rights to the original magazine article, Tinker gave them to him without hesitation. The producers went to New York and spent time in actual cab garages, talking to real drivers as shifts ended in the early morning hours. What they found confirmed everything the article had suggested. Brooks later described the moment when one driver, apparently the most charismatic figure in the garage, the man everyone else had been waiting around for, was asked what his ambitions were. His answer was that he was a cab driver. That was his answer. He had arrived at his destination without ever intending to go anywhere else. That man became the template for Alex Riger, the character who understood exactly where he was and had made his peace with it, while everyone around him was still fighting to leave.
Got part of Thursday afternoon open.
Okay, Thursday it is. Thursday.
Okay, Thursday.
Okay. But remember, you said...
A BC signs on without seeing a script. On the strength of the creator's track record alone, ABC committed to Taxi without seeing a single page of script. That kind of unconditional network commitment, based purely on the reputations of the people involved, was unusual even then. The deal gave the producers the freedom to build the show on their own terms, which they did, constructing an ensemble around a group of characters who each embodied a specific kind of thwarted ambition. The fictional setting was the Sunshine Cab Company in New York City. The cast they assembled was one of the most unusual in American sitcom history, a mix of established stage performers, total unknowns, and at least one person who had never acted professionally in his life before the audition.
Hey, would you leave him alone? He's not asking anything from anybody. Besides, it's not like our lives were in such great shape.
Putting together the cast. Judd Hirsch was the producer's first choice for Alex Riger, the everyman center of the show. He was not enthusiastic. Hirsch had built a reputation in theater and film, and the idea of anchoring a television sitcom struck him as a step down. He told his agent to make demands the producers would never accept, impossible conditions designed to kill the offer without Hirsch having to say no himself. The producers accepted every one of them. When Hirsch saw his name placed above the title in the credits, His reaction, as he later told it, was one of alarm. He worried the rest of the cast would resent him for it. For Danny DeVito, the path to Louis De Palma, the tyrannical, cage-bound dispatcher, was more theatrical. Both Michael Douglas and Jack Nicholson had warned DeVito against doing television, telling him it would use him up. DeVito disagreed, but understood their concern. When casting director Joel Thurm invited him to audition, DeVito walked into the room where Brooks, Weinberger, Daniels, and Davis were waiting, took the script he had been given, threw it onto the coffee table, and said, in Louis' voice before they had even started, "Who wrote this?" He was hired immediately. In 1999, TV Guide ranked Louis De Palma first on its list of the 50 greatest television characters of all time. Tony Danza came from an entirely different world. He had been a professional boxer in Brooklyn. Producers from the film The Warriors had spotted him in the ring one night and approached him about an acting role. James Brooks moved faster, offering Danza the part of Tony Banta, a boxer whose professional record was defined almost entirely by losing, before the Warriors could close the deal. Danza had never done any professional acting. The producers shaped the character around him so extensively that the character shares his first name, a pattern Danza continued on virtually every television project he did afterward. Christopher Lloyd initially appeared only as a guest in the first season, playing Reverend Jim Ignatowski in a single episode. The character, a burned-out relic of the 1960s, his brain, apparently left somewhere in the decade along with his ideals, was supposed to be a one-time appearance. When Lloyd walked into his audition, director James Burrows later said, "Everyone in the room understood immediately that they were looking at something they had not planned for." Lloyd was added to the main cast beginning in season 2, and TV Guide later ranked Reverend Jim 32nd on its list of the 50 greatest television characters. Part of what made the character work was Lloyd's own process. Brooks observed that Lloyd would show up on Mondays as a relatively normal person named Chris, and by Friday, unshaven, with whatever had accumulated during the week, Reverend Jim would emerge on his own. The famous episode in which Jim passes his driving test, pausing for an extended moment to write down the question while the other cabbies watch in silence, became one of the most celebrated comedy sequences the show produced and demonstrated how far Lloyd had expanded what the character was capable of. The first season also included a character who did not survive into the second, John Burns, a naive college student played by Randall Carver. As season 1 developed, the producers noticed that Burns and Tony Banta were filling essentially the same dramatic function. Both were wide-eyed, somewhat simple, easily confused. One of them was redundant. Carver's character was written out, and Christopher Lloyd's Reverend Jim came in to provide a very different kind of eccentric energy that no one else in the cast was occupying. Mandy Patinkin had been a genuine contender for the role of Alex Riger while Hirsch was still undecided. Robin Williams had been considered for the role of Bobby Wheeler, the struggling actor played by Jeff Conaway, but Williams was already committed to Mork and Mindy. These are the near misses that are easy to forget when looking back at a cast that came together so completely.
I don't believe you. I hit you good. You're just trying to cover up with some crummy story because you don't like being knocked down by somebody with no record. Yeah.
The Andy Kaufman situation. Latka Gravas, the sweet, bewildered mechanic who spoke and invented language of undetermined origin, was built around Andy Kaufman's foreign man character, a persona Kaufman had developed and refined in comedy clubs over years. Getting Kaufman was, by all accounts, not a simple transaction. Kaufman had no real interest in situation comedy and was candid about it. He saw the paycheck from Taxi primarily as a way to fund his other work, the performance art, the wrestling provocations, the elaborate long-form pranks that defined his public persona. He considered himself an avant-garde performance artist who had wound up on a sitcom for financial reasons, and he never made much effort to conceal that assessment. The producers negotiated his contract knowing they were essentially buying access to his foreign man character, not to Kaufman himself as a willing or collaborative television actor. The conditions Kaufman demanded before signing were unusual, even by the standards of an industry that had seen unusual contract writers. He wanted to work only 2 days per week, Tuesdays for run-throughs, Fridays for tapings, with no obligations on the other days of the week, regardless of production schedules. He also insisted on receiving 2 studio parking spaces at Paramount, one for himself and one for Tony Clifton, his obnoxious, chain-smoking lounge singer alter ego. Clifton was not Andy Kaufman in any normal sense. Kaufman maintained the separation between himself and Clifton with considerable intensity, and generally refused to acknowledge publicly that they were the same person. The producers agreed to both conditions without argument, presumably calculating that whatever chaos Kaufman brought with him would be outweighed by what he contributed on screen. The Tony Clifton situation eventually escalated beyond what the parking space arrangement had suggested. Without telling the cast or crew in advance, Kaufman had secretly negotiated a contract for the Clifton character to appear in an episode of Taxi as a separate performer. When Clifton arrived on the Paramount lot one Monday morning, in orange makeup, a wig, a fake mustache, and a blue ruffled tuxedo shirt, chain-smoking and smelling as described by DeVito in terms that he himself said defied polite description, neither the cast nor most of the production staff had been warned. Clifton was disruptive from the moment he arrived, failed to learn his lines, harassed the other actors, and was eventually removed from the lot by security guards. Kaufman later acknowledged that being physically ejected from the studio had been the entire point of the exercise. Judd Hirsch later said publicly that Kaufman was genuinely disliked by most of the people on set. His fellow cast members found his methods difficult, and his indifference to the collaborative nature of ensemble work frustrating. Whatever the interpersonal dynamics, Latka Gravas became one of the show's most beloved characters, and Kaufman's presence gave Taxi a dimension it could not have gotten from any conventional comedy performer. Carol Kane, who joined the cast in the second season as Simca, Latka's wife, won 2 Emmy Awards for the role.
Schedule.
You're out, buddy, you're out.
Tony, what are you doing? Put him down.
The Chicago 68 all over again.
The Rise, Emmy after Emmy. Taxi premiered on ABC on September 12, 1978, landing in a time slot between Three's Company and Starsky and Hutch on Tuesday nights. The surrounding programming was lighter, broader, and more immediately crowd-pleasing. The comedy of the era leaned toward broad physical gags and easy setups. Taxi was something different. Its humor came from character and situation, from the weight of unrealized dreams and the small indignities of ordinary life. It did not chase laughs in the conventional sense. It trusted its audience to care about people who were not winning. The grungy Sunshine Cab Company garage, shot on Stage 23 at Paramount Studios in Los Angeles, had the look and feel of a place that had never been designed for comfort, which suited the show's emotional register perfectly. The theme music, a jazz piece called Angela, composed by Bob James, was not the original choice. The producers had initially intended to use a different, more up-tempo Bob James track called Touchdown. They heard Angela while it was being composed for use elsewhere in the 3rd episode and recognized immediately that it was the right sound for the show. The switch was made before the 1st episode aired, and both tracks appeared on James's 1978 album, also called Touchdown. Angela became one of the most recognized television theme pieces of its decade. with a melancholy, searching quality that perfectly matched the tone of a show about people who had not yet found what they were looking for. The opening footage, a checker cab crossing the Queensboro Bridge at what appears to be a continuous drive, was actually about 15 seconds of footage looped repeatedly. Tony Danza was the one driving. In its first season, Taxi finished 9th in the overall ratings and won its first Emmy for Outstanding Comedy Series. It won that award again in 1980 and 1981, making it 3 consecutive years. Judd Hirsch won the Emmy for Outstanding Lead Actor in a Comedy Series in 1981 and again in 1983. Danny DeVito won for Outstanding Supporting Actor in 1981. The show collected 18 Emmy Awards across its run, a number that stands as a testament to how consistently it performed at the top of what American television comedy was capable of. A significant engine of the show's creative quality was the writer's room. James Burrows directed most of the episodes and brought a 4-camera technique that gave the show an unusually fluid visual rhythm for a sitcom of its era. Among the writers who worked on Taxi in its early seasons were Glenn Charles, Leigh Charles, and Burrows himself, 3 people who, after the show's 3rd season, went on to create a small sitcom called Cheers. The connection between the 2 shows ran deep enough that several actors appeared on both, Carol Kane, Rhea Perlman, and Christopher Lloyd among them.
Get cute, Heather.
You love it when I'm cute. Oh, you do.
Oh, no, come on, stop it, stop it, stop it.
The beginning of the end at ABC. The first signs of trouble came not from the quality of the show, but from network scheduling decisions. In its first 2 seasons, Taxi had the benefit of following Three's Company, one of the most watched programs on American television at the time. That arrangement gave Taxi a substantial inherited audience at the start of each Tuesday night episode. In November 1980, ABC moved Taxi out of that time slot to make room for Too Close for Comfort. The show lost a significant portion of its lead-in audience almost immediately. By its 3rd season, ABC had moved Taxi to Wednesday nights, a more competitive slot, and the ratings dropped further. The show finished its 3rd and 4th seasons around 53rd place in the overall rankings. DeVito later described the scheduling changes as feeling like a concerted effort to hide the show from the audience that wanted to watch it. The creative team won their 3rd consecutive Emmy for Outstanding Comedy Series during this period, which made the rating situation feel like an act of injustice to everyone involved. They were still producing work that the industry recognized as the best in the business, while the network was quietly running out of patience. Brooks later said that the executive who canceled the show had held the job for less than a year. ABC had made a broader strategic push away from what insiders described as quality programming toward more commercially straightforward fare. The Aaron Spelling productions, including Dynasty and a continued investment in The Love Boat, that delivered larger audiences with less investment in character and writing. In May 1982, ABC canceled Taxi after 4 seasons. There was no planned finale, no opportunity to build toward a proper ending. The cast and crew were simply informed that it was over. Marilu Henner was in a Pilates class when James Brooks called her to deliver the news. She asked where they were meeting and drove straight to his office. When she arrived, he was already on the phone, exploring whether HBO might want to pick the show up. Cast members later described the day as resembling what it felt like when someone close dies unexpectedly, people drifting toward each other in need of company.
Take this the wrong way, but I think you're crazier than I am. I mean, we barely know each other and you're hearing wedding bells!
The SNL intervention. Danny DeVito was booked to host Saturday Night Live on NBC shortly after the ABC cancellation. The timing proved consequential. During his opening monologue, DeVito read what he described as a letter from his mother, asking God to forgive ABC for canceling the show, and adding, for God's consideration, that she would understand if he chose not to. He then filmed a bit in which he drove around New York City looking increasingly morose until an idea struck him, at which point he blew up the ABC building. The entire Taxi cast flew to New York and appeared on stage during the monologue to take what they believed at the time were their final bows. The response from the studio audience was significant. Grant Tinker, who was by that point head of NBC, watched the monologue and the audience reaction and made a decision. He reached out to the Taxi production with an offer. NBC would take the show for a 5th season. There had been another option in play. HBO had wanted Taxi as well, and according to Christopher Lloyd, the cable network's offer included 12 one-hour episodes per season and significantly more relaxed content standards. NBC countered with 22 half-hour episodes, which was the critical number. It put the show over the 100-episode threshold required for a viable syndication package. That number meant the cast and creators would continue to earn from the show long after its network run ended. Paramount, which co-produced the series, was strongly in favor of reaching syndication, and NBC's offer made it possible. Judd Hirsch later said that the NBC transition was not entirely smooth on his end. NBC wanted to extend contracts for 2 years, and Hirsch balked at the terms. He called Grant Tinker directly to negotiate. Tinker agreed to let Hirsch commit to 1 season rather than 2. Without that conversation, the 5th season might not have happened.
Hey, Lou, what kind of things they teach you at this school for the blind?
Well, it's a class for sighted people to show.
One more season at NBC. Taxi premiered on NBC on September 30th, 1982, following the first season of Cheers on Thursday nights at 9:30 p.m., exactly the same time slot it had occupied at ABC. DeVito, in character as Louis, appeared in an NBC promotional spot and said the words, "Same time, better station." The 5th season had a different emotional texture than the 4 that preceded it. The cast knew, in a way they had not during the ABC years, that the clock was running. DeVito later described it as turning up the good times burners deliberately, everyone enjoying what they knew was the end. NBC tested the show on different nights during the season in search of a time slot that worked, but the ratings remained difficult. The audience that had followed the show from ABC was not large enough to sustain it on a second network. NBC canceled Taxi for the final time in 1983. The last episode aired on June 15, 1983. This time, there was a proper ending, not planned in advance, but something the cast and crew had the space to create, knowing the 5th season was almost certainly the last. Syndication began immediately, with reruns airing on 64 television stations from the moment of cancellation. The show has been in syndication every year since.
I only have 6 minutes before this interview. It's the last chance before Simke gets deported.
Hey, Lucky, excuse me.
What happened after? The cast went in directions no one had quite predicted when Taxi first aired in 1978. Danny DeVito's film career accelerated dramatically after the show ended, Romancing the Stone in 1984, Ruthless People in 1986, Twins in 1988, and eventually his directorial career, including The War of the Roses and Matilda. Tony Danza went directly to Who's the Boss in 1984, where he played a character named Tony, a pattern he repeated so consistently across his career that it became a running joke in the industry. Christopher Lloyd became Doc Brown in Back to the Future in 1985, one of the most beloved and recognizable roles in American film history. Marilu Henner built a television and stage career that continued for decades, and later became known publicly for her hyperthymesia, a rare autobiographical memory condition that allows her to recall virtually every day of her life in detail. Judd Hirsch returned to theater periodically throughout the years and took on film and television roles across decades, earning an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor for Belfast in 2022, 44 years after he first drove a checker cab across a looped 15 seconds of Queensboro Bridge footage. Andy Kaufman was diagnosed with a rare form of lung cancer not long after Taxi ended its run and died on May 16, 1984, at the age of 35. Jeff Conaway, who had left the show during its 4th season after his substance abuse issues made him impossible to retain, struggled with those issues for the remainder of his life and died in 2011 at the age of 60. Writer Sam Simon had described finding Conaway on the floor of his dressing room one day, too incapacitated to perform. His lines had been redistributed to DeVito and Lloyd without any reduction in audience laughter, which is when the producers understood that the Bobby Wheeler character had become expendable. In 1999, Jim Carrey starred as Kaufman in Man on the Moon, a biographical film directed by Milos Forman. Judd Hirsch, Marilu Henner, Jeff Conaway, Carol Kane, Randall Carver, and Christopher Lloyd all appeared as themselves in the film. DeVito appeared in a different capacity, as Kaufman's manager George Shapiro. The checker cab company that supplied every taxi used during the show's run, the Checker Motors Corporation, out of Kalamazoo, Michigan, went out of business in 1982, the same year ABC canceled the show. It is one of those coincidences that would feel too neat if you invented it. Taxi ran for 114 episodes, won 18 Emmy Awards, and got canceled twice. Both times, it deserved more than it got from the networks that made that call. That is the full story of how a show that won 3 consecutive Emmys for Outstanding Comedy Series found itself out in the cold. Not once, but twice. If you enjoyed this one, hit that like button and subscribe. There is much more waiting for you.